Is there any agony deeper than witnessing the man I loved for over 30 years kiss our newlywed daughter-in-law beside our son's coffin at his funeral, as if my pain, my love, meant nothing at all? Have you ever been heartbroken, faced a moment so shocking it shatters your core like I have? But that kiss was only the beginning. The secret I uncovered afterward tore my heart apart, destroying everything I ever believed about my family. This is the story of the day my entire world collapsed. Welcome to Voices of Auntie Rose, where stories of family, forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to rise above betrayal come to life with heart and soul. We're so glad you're here, joining a community that celebrates the unbreakable human spirit. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story. And it would be amazing if you could like this video, share it, or drop a comment letting us know what time it is and which city or country you're watching from. Your shares and comments are the greatest gift, the powerful inspiration that keeps this channel growing and spreading meaningful life lessons every single day. Now, let's dive into today's story. When I picked up the phone at 6:32 on that gray Monday morning in October, I never imagined those words from Harborview Medical Center would shatter my entire world into a million pieces that could never be put back together. Mrs. Foster, I'm so sorry to inform you. Your son Michael was killed in a car accident last night on Interstate 5. My son. My beautiful 34-year-old son. Gone. The phone slipped from my trembling hands and crashed onto the hardwood floor of my Seattle kitchen. I couldn't breathe. My chest constricted so violently I thought I was having a heart attack. The room spun around me, and I had to grip the granite countertop, the one my late husband Robert and I had installed 20 years ago during our kitchen renovation, just to keep myself from collapsing onto the cold tile floor. "Richard!" I screamed for my husband, my voice cracking with a terror I had never known. "Richard! Something happened to Michael!" Richard came running down the stairs, still in his pajamas, his salt and pepper hair disheveled from sleep. At 66 years old, he moved slower than he used to, but the panic in my voice made him sprint. When he reached me, I was hyperventilating, clutching my chest, tears streaming down my 77-year-old face so fast I couldn't see. "Diane, what's wrong? What happened?" He grabbed my shoulders, and I noticed his hands were shaking too. "Michael. Car accident. They said he's dead, Richard. Our baby is dead." The color drained from Richard's face completely. For 32 years of marriage, I had never seen him look like that, like someone had reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. We held each other in that kitchen, sobbing, our world ending in real time, neither of us able to process that our only child, our miracle baby after years of trying, was gone forever. The nurse's voice continued speaking from the phone on the floor, tinny and distant. Richard picked it up with trembling hands. I could only hear fragments of what she was saying. "Interstate 5 southbound, 11:45 last night. Tesla Model 3 struck a concrete barrier. Killed instantly. No suffering. No suffering for him, maybe. But infinite suffering for us. His wife Vanessa was in the car," Richard said after he hung up, his voice hollow. "She survived with minor injuries. She's at the hospital now. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law of only 9 months. The beautiful 32-year-old marketing manager Michael had met at some tech conference 2 years ago. The woman who had swept into our lives with her charming smile and designer clothes, who called me Mom Diane in that sweet voice that always seemed just slightly too practiced, too perfect. We drove to Harborview Medical Center in Richard's Volvo, neither of us speaking, both of us crying silently. I stared out the window at the gray Seattle morning, at people going about their normal Monday routines, buying coffee at Starbucks, walking their dogs, heading to work, and I wanted to scream at all of them that my son was dead, that the world should stop turning because Michael Foster no longer existed in it. At the hospital, they took us to a small, windowless room that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and grief. A victim services coordinator with kind eyes and a soft voice explained what had happened. Michael's blood alcohol level was 0.15, nearly twice the legal limit. They had also found traces of Ambien, a sleeping medication, in his system. "That's impossible," I said, my voice coming out harsh and angry. "Michael never drank heavily. He was responsible. He was a software engineer at Amazon, for God's sake. He had to be sharp for his work. Sometimes people make uncharacteristic choices when under stress," the coordinator said gently. "But I knew my son. I had raised him alone for 12 years after his father, my first husband, also named Robert, died of a sudden heart attack when Michael was just 16. I knew every single thing about that boy. He wasn't a heavy drinker. He wasn't reckless. "Where's Vanessa?" Richard asked suddenly, his voice strange. "We need to see her. We need to understand what happened." They led us to a private room where Vanessa sat on a hospital bed, wrapped in a white blanket, a small bandage on her forehead. That was it, just a small bandage. Her husband of 9 months had been killed instantly in a high-speed collision, and she had a bandage you'd put on a paper cut. When we walked in, Vanessa looked up, and something about her expression made my stomach turn. Her eyes were dry, not red-rimmed from crying, just dry. And when she saw Richard, before she saw me, something passed between them. A look I couldn't quite name, but that made my blood run cold. "Mom, Diane! Dad, Richard!" She burst into tears, then perfectly timed tears that appeared the moment she acknowledged our presence. She reached for me, and I let her embrace me because what else could I do? My son's widow was grieving too. Of course she was. But over her shoulder, I watched Richard. And what I saw made me feel sick. He wasn't looking at her like a father-in-law looks at his grieving daughter-in-law. He was looking at her with something else, something that made my skin crawl. Fear? Guilt? "I'm so sorry." Vanessa sobbed into my shoulder, her body shaking. I tried to stop him from driving. He'd been drinking at dinner. We had a fight. He was so angry. He just got in the car, and I got in to try to calm him down, and then... Her story sounded rehearsed, every word in exactly the right place, every pause calculated for maximum emotional impact. "What were you fighting about?" I asked, pulling back to look at her face. For just a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. I saw something flash in her eyes: panic, calculation, before the grief returned. "Nothing important now," she whispered. "Just stupid couple stuff, money, his work schedule. It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters anymore." Richard stood by the window, his back to us, his shoulders rigid. He hadn't hugged Vanessa, hadn't comforted her. He just stood there staring out at the Seattle skyline, and I realized he hadn't actually looked at me since we entered this room. Something was wrong. Something beyond the horrific tragedy of losing Michael. Something darker, more sinister, lurking beneath the surface of this terrible morning. Mrs. Foster, the victim services coordinator, appeared in the doorway. "There are some papers you'll need to sign. And you can see Michael now, if you're ready, to say goodbye." I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. But I stood up on shaking legs and followed her down the hall, Richard trailing behind me like a ghost. They led us to the morgue. The room was freezing cold, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. A white sheet covered a body on a metal table, my son's body. My baby boy who I had carried for 9 months, who I had nursed and rocked and sung to sleep, who I had taught to read and ride a bike and drive a car, who I had put through college working double shifts as a bookkeeper, who I had walked down the aisle at his wedding just 9 months ago, beaming with pride. The medical examiner pulled back the sheet. Michael's face was peaceful, almost serene, like he was sleeping. But the rest of him I turned away, gagging, my hand over my mouth. The impact had been catastrophic. I collapsed. My legs simply gave out. Richard caught me, and I screamed into his chest, a sound I didn't recognize as human. The kind of scream that comes from a place so deep inside you that you didn't even know it existed until grief rips it out of you. "My baby," I sobbed. "My baby boy. Not my baby. Please God, not my baby." Richard held me, but his embrace felt wrong, stiff, mechanical. And when I looked up at his face, I saw he was crying. Yes, but there was something else in his expression. Something that looked almost like relief? No, I was seeing things. Grief was making me paranoid, making me see shadows where there was only sorrow. But as we left the hospital an hour later, after signing papers and answering questions and making preliminary arrangements with the funeral home, I noticed Richard checking his phone constantly, typing messages with trembling fingers, and when I asked him who he was texting at a time like this, he said, "Work, just work stuff." But Richard had retired 2 years ago from his civil engineering firm. He didn't have work anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, the bed where Richard and I had made love thousands of times over 32 years of marriage, where we had talked about our dreams and fears and hopes, and I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that horrible day. Michael's blood alcohol level, the Ambien in his system, Vanessa's dry eyes that only produced tears when we entered the room, that look between her and Richard, his strange behavior at the hospital, the constant texting. At 2 a.m, unable to bear the thoughts circling in my head like vultures, I got up and went to Richard's home office. His laptop sat on the desk, closed but not locked. Richard had never been good with technology. He used the same password for everything, Robert 1959, his birth year combined with his middle name. I shouldn't have looked. A good wife wouldn't have looked. But I wasn't feeling like a good wife at 2 a.m. with my son dead and suspicions eating away at my sanity. I opened his browser history. What I found made me vomit into his wastebasket, heaving so violently I thought my ribs would crack. Hotels, come searches, romantic weekend getaways Seattle Tiffany, women's necklaces under $5,000, a Seattle divorce lawyer's website, visited multiple times, and an email draft, unsent, dated 3 days ago. I can't keep doing this. Michael is my son. We've gone too far. We need to stop before someone gets hurt. Vanessa. My husband and my daughter-in-law. I ran to the bathroom and vomited again, this time bringing up nothing but bile and anguish. My hands shook so badly I couldn't grip the toilet bowl. The room spun. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I genuinely thought it might burst through my chest. 32 years. 32 years of marriage. And he was having an affair with our son's wife. And now, our son was dead. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the cold bathroom floor, my back against the bathtub, staring at nothing. The email draft was burned into my brain like a brand. I can't keep doing this. Michael is my son. We've gone too far. We need to stop before someone gets hurt. Before someone gets hurt. But someone did get hurt. Someone got killed. My mind raced backward through the past 6 months, and suddenly details I had dismissed or overlooked came flooding back with brutal clarity. Like photographs developing in a dark room, each memory revealed something sinister I hadn't wanted to see. 3 months ago, I had come home early from my volunteer shift at the Seattle Public Library, where I helped seniors with computer literacy every Tuesday, and found Richard's car in the driveway at 1 p.m. That was unusual. He always went to the gym on Tuesdays. When I walked in, he was rushing down the stairs, his shirt buttoned wrong, his hair messy. "Diane, you're home early." "I had a headache," I'd said, setting my purse on the console table. "Are you feeling okay? You look flushed." "Just came back from a run," he'd said quickly. Too quickly, going to shower now. But his running shoes sat by the front door, completely dry and clean. And when I went upstairs later that evening, I noticed our guest bedroom, the one we kept pristine for when my sister Patricia visited, had been used. The bedspread was wrinkled, and there was an indent on one of the pillows. When I mentioned it to Richard, he said he'd taken a nap there because the afternoon sun was too bright in our room. I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? After 32 years of marriage, you trust your husband. Now, sitting on that bathroom floor at 3 a.m, I realized what had really happened. Vanessa had been in our house, in our guest bedroom, with my husband. While I was teaching elderly people how to use email, my husband was betraying me and our son under our own roof. The nausea hit me again, but there was nothing left in my stomach to expel. I dry heaved until my ribs ached and tears streamed down my face. More memories surfaced, each one more damning than the last. 6 weeks ago, Michael had called me, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, can I ask you something? And please be honest." "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong? Do you think Vanessa is happy with me? Like, really happy?" The question had startled me. "Why would you ask that? You two seem perfect together." "I don't know. She's been distant lately, always on her phone. She says it's work, but, Mom, does Dad ever mention anything about her? They talk a lot, right? About investments and financial planning?" My chest tightened now as I remembered how I'd brushed off his concerns. "Your father just likes to help young people with money management, honey. You know how he is. And Vanessa probably is stressed from work. Marketing jobs in Seattle are brutal. Just talk to her. Communication is everything in marriage." God, what had I done? My son had been reaching out to me, telling me something was wrong, and I had dismissed his fears. I had sent him back into the arms of a woman who was sleeping with his father. I pressed my fist against my mouth to muffle the sound of my sobbing. I couldn't wake Richard. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of this betrayal. With shaking hands, I went back to Richard's computer and dug deeper. His email account was still logged in. He never logged out of anything. I scrolled through his sent folder, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There. An email to Vanessa from 2 months ago. V, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. But we have to be more careful. Michael is starting to ask questions. Maybe we should cool things off for a while until the wedding anniversary passes. I love you, R. I love you. He loved her. I grabbed the wastebasket and vomited again, this time so violently that blood vessels burst in my eyes. The physical pain was almost welcome. It gave me something to focus on besides the agony tearing through my heart. How long? How long had this been going on? I searched further back. 4 months, 6 months, 8 months. The emails went back 11 months. 11 months of, I miss you and can't wait to see you, and detailed plans of stolen afternoons and weekend getaways when I thought Richard was at his model train club meetings or playing golf with his retired colleagues. One email from 7 months ago made me press my hand against my chest because I thought I was actually having a heart attack. V, you asked me when I knew I loved you instead of just desiring you. It was that Sunday when Diane invited you and Michael for brunch, and you wore that blue dress. You laughed at something Michael said, but your eyes found mine across the table. In that moment, I knew I would leave everything for you, even my son. Especially my son, because he doesn't deserve you. He never did. You're mine. R. Especially my son. My husband, the man I had built a life with, the man I had raised a child with, had written those words about our boy. Our only child. The miracle baby we had tried for 5 years to conceive. I remembered that brunch. It was in March. I had made my special lemon ricotta pancakes Michael's favorite since he was 8 years old. I had been so happy that morning, having my family around the table, watching my son with his beautiful new wife, seeing Richard smile and laugh. It had felt perfect. But across that table, while I served pancakes and poured orange juice and basked in the simple joy of family, my husband and my daughter-in-law had been making love confessions to each other. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that I couldn't process it. My brain kept trying to reject the information, to find some other explanation, but the evidence was overwhelming. I looked at the clock. 4:15 in the morning. In a few hours, I would have to start making funeral arrangements for my son. I would have to choose a casket and pick out flowers and write an obituary. I would have to call relatives and plan a memorial service, and somehow function in the world while my entire life burned down around me. But first, I needed to know more. I opened Richard's bank statements. We had separate checking accounts but a joint savings account for household expenses. He didn't know I had the password to his personal account. I'd gotten it years ago when he was recovering from knee surgery and needed me to pay his bills. What I found made my hands shake so violently I almost couldn't click the mouse. Over the past 11 months, Richard had withdrawn $63,400 in cash. $63,400 from his retirement account, taken out in increments of $2,000 to $3,000 at a time, always from different ATMs around Seattle. $63,000. Where had it gone? I knew where it had gone. Into hotel rooms and expensive dinners and jewelry for Vanessa. Maybe into an apartment somewhere. A love nest where they could meet without fear of discovery. But there was more. 3 weeks ago, just 3 weeks before Michael died, Richard had transferred $28,000 from our joint savings account into an account I didn't recognize. The memo line read, Investment Opportunity, VC. VC. Vanessa Chen. Her maiden name, which she'd kept professionally. He was giving her money. Lots of money. Our money. Money from the savings account we'd built over 3 decades of marriage, meant for emergencies and home repairs and eventually my medical care when I got older. The total came to $91,400 that I could track. Almost 6 figures of our retirement funds, stolen to finance an affair with our son's wife. I thought about the vacation to Hawaii I'd been planning for our 35th wedding anniversary, 3 years from now. I'd been saving a little bit each month, excited about finally seeing the islands after a lifetime of dreaming about them. That money was gone now, spent on betrayal. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps. Richard was awake. I quickly closed all the browser windows and shut the laptop, my heart hammering. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed time to think, to plan. I grabbed a tissue and wiped my face, then stood on legs that felt like jelly. When I emerged from the office, Richard was standing at the top of the stairs in his robe, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't read in the darkness. "Diane, what are you doing up? It's 4:30 in the morning." "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Went to get some water." He came down the stairs slowly, and I noticed he was holding his phone. Had he been texting someone? At 4:30 in the morning, hours after our son died? "Me neither," he said. "This is... God, Diane, I can't believe Michael's gone." He reached for me, tried to pull me into an embrace, and my body recoiled instinctively. I saw the flash of something in his eyes, surprise, suspicion. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, I can't be touched right now, everything hurts." It was true. Everything did hurt. My chest ached like someone had carved out my heart with a rusty knife. My head throbbed from crying. My throat was raw from vomiting. My joints felt like they were filled with broken glass. But the worst pain was the one I couldn't locate physically, the pain of knowing that the man standing in front of me, the man I had given 32 years of my life to, was a stranger, a liar. Possibly even worse than a liar. "V, I can't keep doing this. Michael is my son. We've gone too far. We need to stop before someone gets hurt." Before someone gets hurt. That email was dated 3 days before the accident. 3 days before, Michael crashed his Tesla into a concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour with alcohol and Ambien in his system. Michael didn't take Ambien. I knew that for certain because I was his mother and he told me everything about his health. He had trouble sleeping sometimes, but he used melatonin and meditation apps, not prescription sleeping pills. But Richard took Ambien, had been taking it for 2 years, ever since he retired and his sleep schedule got disrupted. The prescription bottle sat in our medicine cabinet upstairs, with his name printed clearly on the label. The room started spinning. I grabbed the stair railing to keep from falling. "Diane, you're scaring me. Are you okay? Should I call a doctor?" Richard reached for me again. "Don't touch me!" The words came out sharper than I intended, almost a shout. Richard stepped back, his face a mask of hurt confusion. "I know you're grieving. We both are. But we need to support each other right now. Michael would want..." "Don't you dare tell me what Michael would want." I was screaming now, all my careful control shattering. "Don't you dare speak his name." "Diane, what's wrong with you? I know we're both devastated, but this hostility..." "Get away from me," I whispered, my voice dropping to something cold and deadly. "Just get away from me right now, Richard. I can't look at you." I turned and walked into our living room, switching on every light, needing to see clearly, needing to ground myself in something real and solid. On the mantel above our fireplace sat our family photos, Michael's baby pictures, his high school graduation, his wedding day 9 months ago when he'd married Vanessa in a beautiful ceremony at the Seattle Arboretum. Richard and I stood on either side of the happy couple in that photo, both of us beaming with pride. I picked up the wedding photo, staring at it with new eyes. Richard's hand rested on Vanessa's shoulder in the picture. I had thought it was a paternal gesture at the time. Now I saw it for what it was: possessive, intimate, the touch of a man who believed he owned the woman in white. And Vanessa's smile. God, how had I missed it? She wasn't looking at her new husband in this photo. She was looking slightly to the left, directly at Richard, with an expression that was unmistakably flirtatious. My son stood between them, completely oblivious, grinning with the happiness of a man who thought his life was perfect. I hurled the frame across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, glass exploding everywhere, the photograph of my son's wedding day torn and ruined on the floor. "Diane." Richard rushed into the room. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "Yes," I said, laughing now, a horrible sound that didn't sound human. "Yes, I've lost my mind. I've lost my son. I've lost everything. So yes, Richard, I've absolutely lost my mind." He stared at me like I was a stranger. Good. Because I was looking at him the same way. "I'm calling Dr. Morrison," he said, pulling out his phone. "You need something to help you calm down. This isn't healthy grief. This is a breakdown." "Put down that phone." My voice was ice. "Put it down now, or I swear to God, Richard, I will tell you exactly what I know, and neither of us is ready for that conversation yet." His finger froze over the screen, the color drained from his face, and in that moment, I knew for certain that my worst fears were true. My husband was guilty of something far worse than infidelity. The sun rose over Seattle that Tuesday morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful for a day when my world had ended. I hadn't slept at all. Neither had Richard. We moved around each other in our house like ghosts, not speaking, not touching, existing in separate universes of grief and guilt and secrets that hung between us like poison gas. At 7:30, Richard's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and I watched his face carefully. His jaw tightened. His eyes flickered with something panic? Calculation? He typed a quick response, his thumbs moving urgently across the screen. "Who's texting you at 7:30 in the morning the day after our son died?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. "Just people from the funeral home. They need information for the arrangements." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Really? Which funeral home? We haven't chosen one yet." He fumbled for words. I called Evergreen Memorial last night while you were sleeping. I wanted to get started on the process. I thought it would help." Another lie. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his fingers gripped his phone just a little too tightly, like he was afraid I might grab it from him. "Give me your phone, Richard." "What?" "Diane, this is ridiculous. I'm not... Give me your goddamn phone right now, or I'm calling the police and telling them I have concerns about Michael's accident." The threat hung in the air between us. Richard's face went from red to white in seconds. His hand trembled as he held the phone, and for a moment I thought he might actually refuse. But then something in his expression crumbled, and he slowly extended the device toward me. I snatched it from his hand and looked at the screen. The text was from Vanessa. "We need to talk, now. Before you go to the funeral home. This is falling apart, R. I can't do this alone." Before I could respond, another text came through. "I'm scared. What if they find out? What if she knows?" She. Me. They were talking about me. My fingers moved across the screen, scrolling up through their conversation. Messages from last night, after we'd left the hospital, after we'd come home and I'd pretended to try to sleep while Richard sat downstairs in the darkness. Vanessa. Did she suspect anything at the hospital? Richard. I don't think so. She's too devastated to notice anything else. Vanessa. What about the pills? Did you get them back? Richard. Yes. Flushed them this morning while she was in the shower. No one will ever know. The pills. The Ambien. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I kept scrolling, going back further, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst through my chest, back through weeks of messages, back through the planning and the scheming and the cold, calculated destruction of my son's life. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa, Michael said he wants to change his life insurance beneficiary to just me, remove you and Diane. He's suspicious about something. We're running out of time, R. Richard, then we need to move faster. This weekend, when Diane goes to Portland to visit Patricia. Vanessa, I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? Richard, nothing will go wrong. It has to look completely natural. An accident. He's been stressed at work. People will believe he was drinking and made a terrible choice. I stopped breathing. The room tilted sideways. I grabbed the kitchen counter with my free hand, my knees buckling, black spots dancing at the edges of my vision. They killed him. My husband and my daughter-in-law murdered my son. Diane. Richard's voice came from very far away. Diane, please. Let me explain. I looked up at him, this man I had shared a bed with for 32 years, this man I had trusted with every part of my life. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face, but they meant nothing to me. They were empty, hollow, the tears of a man who'd been caught, not a man who was sorry. You killed our son. The words came out in a whisper, but they might as well have been screams. You murdered Michael. No, it wasn't like that. It was an accident. We never meant for it to happen that way. We just wanted, he choked on his own words. You just wanted what? His wife? His life? What did you want so badly that you killed your own child for it? Richard collapsed into one of our kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. We were going to leave. Vanessa and I. We were going to go to Vancouver, start over. But Michael found out about us. He confronted Vanessa 3 days before the accident. He said he was going to divorce her, take everything, ruin her reputation, and he said he was going to tell you about me, make sure you got everything in our divorce. So you killed him. My voice was eerily calm now, the shock giving way to a cold clarity, because he was going to expose you, because he was going to interfere with your plans. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Richard shouted, standing up suddenly. We just wanted to make him drowsy, make him seem impaired so if he tried to tell anyone about us, they'd think he was unstable. We put the Ambien in his drink at dinner, just 2 pills. Just enough to make him tired and confused. But then Vanessa suggested they go for a drive to talk things through, and you planned for him to crash. You wanted him dead. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You gave him sleeping pills and alcohol and sent him onto the freeway at night. You murdered him, and you made it look like drunk driving. Richard's face crumpled. I didn't want to. God, Diane, I didn't want to. But Vanessa said it was the only way. She said if we didn't do something, Michael would destroy both of us. She said he'd already hired a divorce lawyer, that he was going to take everything from her. And she said once he was gone, we could be together. We could have the insurance money. We could have the house he just bought. We could have everything. The insurance money. Michael had a life insurance policy through Amazon, $800,000. And the house in Ballard he'd just purchased with Vanessa 6 months ago was worth at least $900,000 in Seattle's insane real estate market. $1.7 million. That's what my son's life was worth to them. I walked very calmly to the kitchen drawer where I kept important phone numbers. I pulled out the card Detective Sarah Morrison from Seattle PD had given me at the hospital yesterday. She'd said to call if we had any questions about the accident investigation. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. Diane, what are you doing? Richard's voice was panicked now, desperate. What I should have done the moment I found out you were a monster. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to it ring. Richard lunged across the kitchen and tried to grab the phone from my hand. We struggled, and I felt his fingers digging into my wrist with a force that would leave bruises. This man who had never raised a hand to me in 32 years was now hurting me, trying to silence me, trying to save himself. Detective Morrison. The voice came through the phone, clear and professional. This is Diane Foster, I said, my voice shaking but clear. My son Michael died in a car accident yesterday on Interstate 5. I need to report a murder. Richard let go of my wrist like it had burned him. He stumbled backward, his face ashen, and I saw the exact moment when he realized his life as he knew it was over. Mrs. Foster, Detective Morrison's voice sharpened immediately. I'm listening. Tell me everything. And I did. Standing in my kitchen while my husband collapsed onto the floor, sobbing and begging me to stop, I told Detective Morrison everything I'd found. The emails, the bank records, the text messages on Richard's phone admitting to drugging Michael, the plan to make it look like an accident. Mrs. Foster, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Detective Morrison said, her voice urgent but calm. Do not let your husband leave the house. Do not let him destroy any evidence. Do not let him call anyone. Officers are on their way to your location right now. They'll be there in less than 5 minutes. Can you stay safe until then? Yes, I said, looking down at Richard on the floor. He looked small suddenly, pathetic, nothing like the man I'd thought I'd married. I'll be fine. He's not going to hurt me. He's already taken everything from me that matters. While we waited for the police, I called Vanessa. Richard tried to stop me, tried to tell me not to, but I shoved him away with a strength I didn't know I possessed. She answered on the second ring, her voice breathy and fake sweet. Mom, Diane, I was just about to call you. I wanted to talk about the funeral arrangements. I think Michael would have wanted— The police know everything, I said, cutting her off. They know you and Richard murdered him. They're at my house right now arresting Richard, and they're coming for you next. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, Vanessa's voice changed completely, dropping the sweet daughter-in-law act and becoming something cold and venomous that I'd never heard before. You stupid old woman. You couldn't just let it go, could you? Michael was weak. He was boring. He could never satisfy me the way Richard could. And now you've ruined everything because you couldn't mind your own business. You killed my son. I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You looked me in the eye at the hospital and hugged me and cried fake tears. And all along you'd murdered my child. He was going to take everything from me in the divorce. Vanessa screamed into the phone. He was going to leave me with nothing. What was I supposed to do, just let him destroy my life? So you destroyed his instead. My voice broke. He loved you. He gave you everything. And you killed him for money. He was collateral damage, Vanessa said coldly. If he'd just stayed in his lane, none of this would have happened. But he had to go snooping, had to find Richard's texts on my phone. He couldn't just be oblivious like you were. You've made it this far, go ahead and hit like to let me know you're still with me. You know, every share you make might help someone out there find a little hope. And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe because who knows, the next story might just touch your heart. The cruelty of her words was breathtaking. But they also sealed her fate. Because I was recording the call, Detective Morrison had told me to keep her talking if possible, and every word Vanessa spoke was being captured as evidence. The police are coming for you, I said again. It's over, Vanessa. It's all over. No, she said, and I heard panic creeping into her voice now. No, you're lying. Richard wouldn't tell them anything. He loves me. He wouldn't. He told me everything. And I told the police. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. I hung up while she was still screaming at me, her composure completely shattered. 3 police cars pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing red and blue against the gray Seattle morning. Neighbors came out onto their porches to watch. Within minutes, Richard was in handcuffs, being read his Miranda rights, his face wet with tears and snot as he begged me to forgive him, to help him, to save him. I said nothing. I just watched them put him in the back of the police car like the criminal he was. Detective Sarah Morrison sat across from me in my living room, a digital recorder on the coffee table between us, her notepad filled with pages of my statement. She was a woman in her early 40s with kind brown eyes that had probably seen more horror than anyone should have to witness, yet she still managed to look at me with genuine compassion. Mrs. Foster, she said gently, I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to ask you some more questions about the timeline. When exactly did you first start noticing unusual behavior between your husband and Vanessa? I wrapped my hands around the cold mug of tea my neighbor Eleanor had made me an hour ago. Eleanor sat beside me on the couch, her hand on my back, offering silent support. She'd come running over when she saw the police cars, and she hadn't left my side since. I didn't notice, I said, my voice hollow. That's the worst part. I was completely blind to it. They were having an affair right under my nose for almost a year, and I saw nothing. Detective Morrison leaned forward. That's actually very common, Mrs. Foster. These situations rely on trust. You had no reason to suspect your husband or your daughter-in-law of betraying you. That's not a failure on your part. That's a manipulation on theirs. But it felt like a failure. It felt like I had failed Michael by not protecting him, by not seeing the danger that lived in his own home, wore his father's face, slept in his bed. Walk me through the night of the accident again, Detective Morrison said. What did Richard tell you he was doing that evening? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. He said he was going to his model train club meeting. He goes every Sunday evening from 6 to 9:30. Or at least, that's what he's been telling me for the past 2 years. And you believed him? Why wouldn't I? He's been interested in model trains since he was a boy. His father built them together. I paused, remembering something. But now that I think about it, he never brought home any photographs from the club, never talked about the other members by name, never invited me to come see what they were working on. Detective Morrison made a note. We've already checked with the Pacific Northwest Model Railroad Club. Your husband was a member, but he only attended 3 meetings in the past year. The president said Richard quit coming regularly about 10 months ago. 10 months ago, right when the affair with Vanessa started. Where was he really going? I asked, though I already knew the answer would break my heart even more. We're checking hotel records now. We've also subpoenaed both Richard's and Vanessa's phone records, financial statements, and email accounts. We're going to track every movement, every transaction, every communication. She paused. Mrs. Foster, I want you to prepare yourself. What we find is probably going to be very painful. More painful than knowing they murdered my son? My voice cracked. More painful than realizing my husband of 32 years valued his affair over his own child's life? Eleanor squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest woman I know, Diane. You're going to get through this." But I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was made of shattered glass, held together only by rage and the desperate need for justice for Michael. Detective Morrison's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression hardened. "Vanessa Chen has been apprehended at SeaTac Airport. She was attempting to board a flight to Vancouver with a one-way ticket purchased this morning at 6:45. She had $47,000 in cash in her carry-on luggage." My stomach lurched. She was running. "Yes, but we got her." Detective Morrison stood up. "Mrs. Foster, I need to go downtown now. We'll be interrogating both suspects. I promise you, we're going to build an airtight case. Your son will get justice." After she left, Eleanor made me eat something, a piece of toast that tasted like cardboard and turned to cement in my stomach. My phone kept ringing. Patricia, my sister, calling from Seattle where she'd been staying after flying in yesterday. Friends from church. Michael's colleagues from Amazon who'd heard the news. I couldn't talk to any of them. I let every call go to voicemail. Around noon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Jessica Whitney, my friend from book club, standing there with a casserole dish and tears in her eyes. "Diane, I just heard. Not just about Michael, but about Richard and Vanessa. It's all over the neighborhood." She pushed past me into the house, setting the casserole on the kitchen counter. "How are you still standing? How are you breathing?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a nightmare." Jessica pulled me into a fierce hug. "That monster. That absolute monster. I never liked him, you know. Richard always seemed too smooth, too charming. And Vanessa, God, Diane. I tried to tell you at Michael's wedding that something felt off about her, remember?" I did remember. Jessica had pulled me aside at the reception, slightly drunk on champagne, and said, "I don't know what it is about that girl, but she gives me the creeps. Watch her eyes. They're cold." I'd laughed it off, attributed it to too much wine and wedding drama. "You tried to warn me," I whispered. "Why didn't I listen?" "Because you're a good person who sees the best in people." "That's not a character flaw, Diane. That's what makes you human. What makes them monsters is that they exploited that goodness." Over the next few hours, more people arrived. My pastor, Reverend Thompson, who sat with me and prayed even though I wasn't sure I believed God was listening anymore. My doctor, who checked my blood pressure dangerously high and prescribed medication I probably wouldn't take. My neighbor from across the street, Margaret, who brought flowers and hugged me without saying a word, because what words could possibly be adequate? But no one from Richard's family called. Not his brother in Portland, not his elderly mother in the nursing home in Tacoma. Either they didn't know yet, or they were too ashamed to face me. I hoped it was shame. I hoped they were drowning in it. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was alone again. Patricia had gone to the funeral home to start making arrangements because I couldn't bear to choose a casket for my son, couldn't bear to think about burying him in the ground while his murderers sat in jail cells. I walked through my house like a stranger, seeing everything with new eyes. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, a place where evil had been planned and executed. In our bedroom, the room I would never sleep in again, I opened Richard's closet. His clothes hung neatly on hangers, his shoes lined up in perfect rows. Normal. Everything looked so devastatingly normal. I started pulling things off shelves, looking for more evidence, more proof of his betrayal. In a shoebox on the top shelf, I found receipts, dozens of them. Dinner at Canlis, Seattle's most expensive restaurant, $287. A weekend at the Salish Lodge in Snoqualmie, $893. Jewelry from a boutique in Pioneer Square, $3,200. Each receipt was dated. Each one represented a moment when Richard chose Vanessa over me, over Michael, over everything we'd built together. I found a burner phone tucked inside one of Richard's old tennis shoes, the kind criminals use in movies. My husband, respectable, retired, boring Richard Foster, had a burner phone for his affair. I turned it on. The battery was nearly dead, but there was enough power to see the text messages, hundreds of them, all to and from one number, Vanessa's. The texts were explicit, graphic, discussing things I would never have imagined Richard capable of thinking, much less doing. But worse than the sexual content were the messages about Michael. "Vanessa, 3 months ago. M is getting suspicious. He asked me why I smell like your cologne. I told him it was a new fabric softener, but he didn't believe me. Richard, we need to be more careful, or we need to accelerate our timeline. Vanessa. What do you mean? Richard. I mean, maybe it's time to stop being careful and start being free. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. Accelerate the timeline. They'd been planning this for months. This wasn't a crime of passion or a terrible accident. This was premeditated murder, discussed and planned in text messages like they were deciding what restaurant to visit. My phone rang. Detective Morrison's number. Mrs. Foster, I wanted to update you. Both suspects have been formally charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They're being held without bail. Richard has requested to speak with you. No. The word came out sharp and immediate. I understand. You don't have to see him. But he's asking. I don't care what he's asking for. He killed my son. He doesn't get to ask me for anything ever again. There was a pause. Mrs. Foster, I should tell you Richard is claiming he was coerced by Vanessa. He's saying she manipulated him, that he never wanted to hurt Michael, that everything was her idea. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Of course he is. He's a coward. He was always a coward. I just never saw it before. Vanessa is claiming the opposite. She says Richard threatened to leave her with nothing if she didn't help him get rid of Michael. She's painting herself as a victim. They're both liars. They're both killers. I don't care who manipulated whom. They both murdered my child. I agree, Mrs. Foster, and we're going to make sure they both pay for it. The toxicology report came back. Michael had enough Ambien in his system to sedate a horse, plus alcohol. There's no way this was an accident. And we found Richard's prescription bottle. He'd refilled it 2 days before Michael's death. Now the bottle is empty. My legs gave out. I sank onto the bed, Michael's face flashing through my mind. My beautiful boy, drugged and confused, climbing into his car while the two people who should have protected him watched him drive to his death. Detective Morrison, I said, my voice breaking. Did he suffer? Please tell me he didn't suffer. The medical examiner says the impact was instantaneous. He didn't feel anything. Small mercy, tiny, insufficient mercy. But I clung to it anyway because it was all I had. That night, I slept in Michael's old bedroom, the room I'd kept exactly as he'd left it when he moved out at 22 to start his job at Amazon. His college textbooks still sat on the shelf. His high school baseball trophies lined the dresser. His Seattle Mariners posters covered the walls. I lay in his narrow twin bed, clutching his old teddy bear, the one he'd named Mr. Snuggles when he was 3, and I cried until I had nothing left inside me but emptiness and the burning, desperate need to make sure his killers never saw freedom again. 3 days after Michael's death, I sat in the offices of Evergreen Memorial Funeral Home, listening to a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson explain casket options while my brain screamed that this couldn't be real. My sister Patricia sat beside me, holding my hand so tightly I lost circulation in my fingers, but I didn't pull away. The pain anchored me to reality. And this is our premium mahogany option, Mrs. Patterson was saying, gesturing to a photograph of an ornate casket that cost more than my first car. It features hand-carved details. I'll take the oak one, I interrupted, pointing to a simpler casket in the middle price range, $12,800. Michael would have hated the expensive one anyway. He'd always been practical, sensible, more concerned with substance than appearance. Of course. That's a beautiful choice. Now, for the service itself, we have several packages available at ATS, if ATST. My phone buzzed. A text from Detective Morrison. Need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to the station after your appointment? I showed Patricia the message. She nodded. Go. I'll finish up here. But the flowers, the music. I know what Michael liked, Diane. I was his aunt. Let me do this for you. You need to focus on getting justice for him. I kissed her cheek, grateful beyond words for her presence, and drove to the Seattle Police Department downtown. Detective Morrison met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room where another detective sat waiting, a tall man with graying temples who introduced himself as Detective James Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit. Mrs. Foster, Detective Morrison began, Detective Rodriguez has been investigating your husband's financial activities. What he's found is extensive. Detective Rodriguez opened a thick folder and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, transaction records, photographs of checks, Mrs. Foster, over the past 11 months, your husband withdrew a total of $193,000 from various accounts. $93,000 came from his retirement fund, as you discovered. But there's more. He also took out $58,000 from your joint savings account in small increments you might not have noticed. And he liquidated $42,000 worth of stocks from an investment account you didn't know existed. The room tilted. That's almost $200,000. $193,000 to be exact. We've traced where much of it went. Hotels, expensive restaurants, a down payment on a condominium in Vancouver, British Columbia, listed under Vanessa Chen's maiden name. Jewelry purchases totaling $37,000, all gifts for Vanessa. And this. He slid a document across the table. A life insurance policy on Michael, separate from his workplace policy, that Richard took out 8 months ago without Michael's knowledge. Beneficiary, Richard Foster. Value, $500,000. I thought I was going to vomit. He insured Michael's life? His own son? It gets worse, Detective Morrison said quietly. We've been analyzing the text messages and emails more carefully, Mrs. Foster. They started planning this murder at least 4 months ago. It wasn't a sudden decision or a crime of passion. They researched how much Ambien would be needed to impair someone without killing them outright. They studied Michael's driving routes and habits. They calculated insurance payouts and real estate values. Detective Rodriguez pulled out printed text messages. 3 months ago, Vanessa texted Richard, M's life insurance through Amazon is $800,000, plus $500 from the policy you got, plus the house worth $900, plus his investment accounts probably $200. That's $2.4 million reasons to move forward with our plan. When are we doing this? $2.4 million. My son's life had been reduced to a spreadsheet, a calculation, a financial opportunity. Richard responded, Soon. We need to be patient. Make sure everything looks natural. No suspicions. Detective Rodriguez looked at me with something like pity. Mrs. Foster. They planned every detail, including having Vanessa pretend to be injured in the crash to avoid suspicion. What do you mean pretend? Detective Morrison pulled out photographs from the accident scene. Look at the damage to the vehicle. The passenger side where Vanessa claims she was sitting is completely crushed. The airbag deployed with enough force to break ribs. Yet Vanessa walked away with a tiny cut on her forehead that we now believe was self-inflicted. The ER doctor noted it was suspiciously clean, more like a razor cut than impact trauma. She wasn't in the car when it crashed, I whispered, the horrible truth sinking in. She got out before the collision. That's our theory. She drugged Michael, waited until the Ambien and alcohol took full effect, then convinced him to pull over, maybe claiming she felt sick, needed fresh air. She got out. And then she watched him drive away and crash into that barrier at 70 miles per hour. The image burned itself into my brain. My son, confused and drowsy, behind the wheel of his Tesla, with no idea that the woman he loved had just signed his death warrant. Vanessa standing on the side of the highway, watching him die, then inflicting a small cut on her own forehead to play the grieving, injured widow. We've recovered surveillance footage from a gas station half a mile from the crash site, Detective Rodriguez continued. It shows Vanessa walking toward the highway at 11:23 p.m. Her clothes are clean. She's not injured. She's on her phone calling Richard, we've confirmed. Then, at 11:49, 23 minutes after Michael's Tesla hit the barrier, she's back at the gas station. Now she has blood on her forehead. She gets into a rideshare vehicle that takes her to the hospital. She staged everything. Patricia breathed beside me. I hadn't even noticed her enter the room. Yes, and Richard provided the alibi. He told first responders he'd received a frantic call from Vanessa right after the accident. But phone records show they were on the phone for 17 minutes before the collision. They were talking while Michael drove to his death. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair backward. I made it to the trash can in the corner before I vomited, my body rejecting the horror of what these people had done to my child. Patricia rubbed my back while I heaved, Detective Morrison holding my hair away from my face like my mother used to do when I was sick as a child. When I could finally speak, I asked, "What happens now?" The district attorney is building a case for aggravated first-degree murder with special circumstances. Both suspects are facing life without possibility of parole. The trial will likely begin in 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months. An eternity of waiting for justice. An eternity of living in this nightmare. There's one more thing, Detective Morrison said hesitantly. The funeral is scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m., correct? Yes, at Volunteer Park. I'd chosen an outdoor location because Michael had loved nature, loved the open sky. Mrs. Foster, both Richard and Vanessa have requested to attend the funeral, under police supervision, in handcuffs if necessary. They're claiming it's their right as family members. Absolutely not, Patricia exploded. They murdered him. They don't get to. I know. Detective Morrison held up her hand. The DA's office is fighting the request, but I wanted you to be aware it's been made. The judge will rule tomorrow. I thought about Richard and Vanessa at Michael's funeral. Seeing them there, standing over the casket of the man they'd murdered for money, pretending to mourn while really they were probably just worried about their legal situation. If the judge allows them to come, I said, my voice cold and dead, I want everyone to know what they did. I want the truth exposed in front of everyone who loved Michael. Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with Detective Rodriguez. What do you mean? I mean, I want their crimes revealed publicly. At the funeral. In front of the 200 people who will be there. In front of the media because I know this case is all over the news. I want the world to see who they really are. That's highly unusual, Mrs. Foster. And potentially risky from a legal standpoint. I don't care about legal standpoint. My voice rose to a shout. My son is dead. Those monsters killed him for money. And if they want to show their faces at his funeral, then everyone there deserves to know exactly what kind of people they are. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. Diane's right. The truth needs to come out. Michael's friends, his colleagues, his family, they all think this was a tragic accident. They need to know it was murder. Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Let me talk to the DA. There might be a way to do this that doesn't compromise the criminal case. But Mrs. Foster, are you sure? This will be incredibly painful. Reliving all of this in front of hundreds of people? Nothing could be more painful than what I'm already living through," I said. "At least this way, Michael gets his truth told. At least this way, they don't get to hide behind lies and fake grief." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in my living room, going through boxes of Michael's belongings that Patricia had brought from his house. His clothes still smelled like him, that combination of his cologne and laundry detergent that was uniquely Michael. I pressed his favorite sweater to my face and sobbed into the soft fabric. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Vanessa. They're letting me send one message. Please, Mom Diane, you have to help me. Richard forced me to do everything. He threatened me. I was scared. I never wanted to hurt Michael. Please don't let them destroy my life. Please." I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Detective Morrison with a single word: evidence. Then I blocked the number and turned off my phone. The next morning, Judge Miller ruled that Richard and Vanessa would not be permitted to attend the funeral in person, but their lawyers argued for a compromise they could watch via video feed from the jail. "Let them watch," I told Detective Morrison. "Let them see how many people truly loved Michael. Let them see what they destroyed." But I had already started planning something else, something that would ensure everyone at that funeral knew the truth about the monsters who had killed my son. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched the bleakness in my soul. The funeral was scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., and I had barely slept in 5 days. My body was running on pure adrenaline and rage, the only two things keeping me upright. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, when my phone rang. Detective Morrison's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Foster, something's happened. Richard is asking to see you. He says he has information about the night Michael died that he'll only tell you in person." My stomach clenched. "I don't want to see him. I understand." But Diane, she paused, and I noticed she'd started using my first name, dropping the formality as our relationship shifted from professional to something more personal. "He's claiming there's something about the accident that even we don't know yet. Something that changes everything." "Everything is already changed. My son is dead. What could possibly change that? He won't tell us. He'll only speak to you. And his lawyer is pushing for this meeting, saying it's crucial for his cooperation in the investigation." I wanted to refuse. Every cell in my body screamed against being in the same room with the man who'd murdered my child. But a small, desperate part of me needed to understand. Needed to look into Richard's eyes and hear him explain how a father could kill his own son. Fine. When? This afternoon. 3 o'clock. King County Jail. I'll be there with you the entire time. At exactly 3 p.m., I walked through the metal detectors at King County Jail, my legs shaking so badly I had to grip Patricia's arm to stay upright. My sister had insisted on coming, along with Detective Morrison. We were led through a series of locked doors, each one clanging shut behind us with a finality that made my chest tight. The visiting room was small and sterile, separated by thick plexiglass. Richard sat on the other side, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow and gray. He'd aged a decade in 5 days. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, his hands trembling as he picked up the phone receiver. I picked up my side, my hand gripping it so hard my knuckles went white. "Diane," he began, his voice cracking. "Thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to." "Don't." My voice was ice. "Don't thank me. Don't try to make this normal. You murdered our son. Just tell me whatever you dragged me here to say." Richard's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no compassion, just a vast, empty coldness. "I need you to know the truth before the funeral," he said. "Not the truth the police think they know. The real truth. The real truth is you're a killer." "Yes. But it's worse than that, Diane. So much worse." He wiped his face with his sleeve. "Vanessa is pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow. The room spun. Patricia's hand gripped my shoulder, keeping me anchored. "What did you say?" "She's 12 weeks pregnant. With my child. That's why we were so desperate to get rid of Michael. She was going to start showing soon. Michael would have known the baby wasn't his. They'd been having problems in the bedroom for months because she was sleeping with me. I thought I had no more capacity for pain. I was wrong. This revelation opened up new depths of agony I hadn't known existed. You got her pregnant while she was married to your son. I didn't know at first. She told me 2 months ago. She said Michael was getting suspicious, asking questions about why she was sick in the mornings, why she refused wine at dinner. We panicked. We knew if he found out. So you killed him. I screamed into the phone, not caring who heard me. You killed your own son because you got his wife pregnant. Do you have any idea how depraved that is? How evil? I know. God, Diane, I know. Richard was sobbing now, his whole body shaking. I lie awake every night seeing his face, hearing his voice, remembering when he was little and he used to call me his hero. I was his hero, Diane. And I killed him. You're not getting my sympathy, I said coldly. You're not getting my forgiveness. I came here to listen to whatever information you had. Now I've heard it. Is that all? No. Richard leaned closer to the plexiglass, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's more. The night it happened, the night Michael died, he called me. At 10:47 p.m., 36 minutes before the crash. My heart stopped. What did he say? He said, Dad, I know about you and Vanessa. I've known for weeks. I hired a private investigator. I have photos. I have recordings. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police to press charges against you for stealing from Mom's accounts. Then I'm calling Mom and telling her everything. I'm going to destroy both of you. The visiting room was dead silent, except for the sound of Richard's ragged breathing. He knew, I whispered. Michael knew about the affair. He knew everything. He'd been gathering evidence. He was going to expose us, take everything from Vanessa in the divorce, make sure I went to prison for financial fraud. So I called Vanessa immediately after he hung up, and we decided. His voice broke completely. We decided we had to act that night. No more waiting. No more planning. It had to be then. Detective Morrison was recording everything, I knew. Every word Richard spoke was digging his grave deeper, but I needed to hear it all. What happened next? Vanessa called Michael back. She was crying, begging him not to go to the police. She said she'd leave me, end the affair, do anything he wanted. She asked him to come meet her at their favorite restaurant on Capitol Hill so they could talk in person. Michael agreed because he still loved her, Diane. Even after everything, he still loved her. I closed my eyes, picturing my son driving to meet his wife, hoping they could salvage their marriage, having no idea he was driving into a trap. I met them at the restaurant. I told Michael I was there to apologize, to beg his forgiveness. We all ordered drinks. Michael was upset, but he was listening. He wanted to believe we could fix this as a family. Richard's voice became mechanical, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. I went to the bathroom and crushed 8 Ambien pills into powder. When I came back, I distracted Michael by talking about his childhood. Remember that time we went fishing at Lake Washington and he caught his first trout? I told him that story while Vanessa dumped the powder into his drink. 8 pills. Enough to sedate a person completely. Enough to make them incapable of driving safely. We stayed at the restaurant for 90 minutes, long enough for the pills to start working. Michael began slurring his words, getting confused. Vanessa suggested they go home, get some rest, talk more in the morning. She offered to drive, but Michael insisted he was fine, just tired from the stress. And you let him get behind the wheel, knowing he was drugged. Vanessa got in the passenger seat. I followed in my car, staying far enough back that Michael wouldn't notice. We got on Interstate 5 heading south. Michael was driving erratically slow, then fast, weaving slightly. Other cars were honking. And then Vanessa texted me, "Now." My entire body was trembling. Patricia had tears streaming down her face. She told Michael she felt sick, needed air. He pulled over onto the shoulder. Vanessa got out, pretending to vomit. Michael was so out of it by then he barely registered what was happening. She leaned through the window and said something to him, I don't know what, and then she ran to my car. I picked her up, and we drove ahead about a quarter mile and parked. "You watched," I said, my voice breaking. "You watched him drive away." We saw his taillights weaving back onto the highway. We saw him accelerate to 70 miles per hour. And then we saw the Tesla drift right and slam into the concrete barrier. Richard put his face in his hands. "The sound, Diane, the sound of the impact. I'll hear it for the rest of my life." I wanted to reach through the plexiglass and strangle him. I wanted him to suffer the way Michael suffered. The way I was suffering. "Why are you telling me this now?" Richard looked up, his face destroyed by grief and guilt. "Because Vanessa is going to testify that I forced her to do everything, that I threatened to kill her if she didn't help me. She's making a deal with the prosecution. She'll testify against me in exchange for a lighter sentence. She's going to walk away from this, Diane. She's going to have my baby in prison and then get out in 15 years and live her life while Michael is gone forever. And you want me to what? Testify for you? Tell the court you're not as bad as she is? No. I want you to make sure she doesn't get away with this. I want you to tell the truth at the funeral tomorrow. I want everyone to know what she really is. Because if you don't, she's going to play the victim. She's going to cry on the stand and talk about how I manipulated her, how she was scared, how she's just a poor young woman who got caught up with an older, controlling man. You're asking me to help you out of revenge against your mistress. I'm asking you to get justice for Michael, real justice. Both of us should spend the rest of our lives in prison. Not just me while she gets out and raises my child, Michael's half-sibling, and tells everyone she's a survivor." Detective Morrison leaned forward and whispered in my ear, "He's right about one thing. Vanessa's lawyer is negotiating. If we can prove she was an equal partner in the planning, not a coerced accomplice, we can block the plea deal." I looked at Richard through the plexiglass. This man I'd shared 32 years of my life with. This man who'd held my hand during labor when Michael was born. Who'd cried with joy when they placed our son in his arms for the first time. "I'll make sure the truth comes out," I said. "Not for you, never for you, for Michael. So his death means something. So everyone knows he was murdered by 2 people who valued money over his life." "Thank you," Richard whispered. "Don't thank me." "And Richard?" I leaned close to the plexiglass, my voice dropping to something cold and deadly. "I hope you rot in that cell. I hope every single day for the rest of your life you see Michael's face and remember what you took from him. What you took from me. What you took from the world." I hung up the phone and walked out without looking back. If you find this part truly thought-provoking, go ahead and hit like to show your support. Do you feel the same way as the character in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. In the parking lot, I collapsed against Patricia's car and finally let myself scream, a sound of pure anguish that echoed off the concrete walls. Patricia held me while I broke apart completely, while the last fragments of the life I'd known shattered into dust. Tomorrow was the funeral. Tomorrow, I would stand in front of 200 people and reveal the truth about the monsters who'd killed my son. Tomorrow, I would make sure Michael's death wasn't in vain. Saturday morning arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of beautiful October day that made Seattle look like a postcard. The sky was impossibly blue, Mount Rainier visible in the distance, golden leaves falling from the trees in Volunteer Park. It was the kind of day Michael would have loved, perfect weather for hiking or kayaking on Lake Union, activities he'd grown up doing with me before Richard entered our lives. But Michael would never see another beautiful day, and the weather's cheerfulness felt like a personal insult from the universe. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6 a.m., barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. In 5 days, I'd aged 20 years. Gray had sprouted at my temples seemingly overnight. Dark circles hung under my eyes like bruises. My cheekbones were sharper, more prominent. I'd lost 12 pounds from not eating, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. I looked like what I was, a mother destroyed by grief and betrayal. Patricia knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Diane? I made coffee. You need to eat something before we go." "I can't eat." "You have to try. It's going to be a long day. You need your strength." She was right, though the thought of food made my stomach turn. I managed half a piece of toast and 3 sips of coffee before my body rejected it, and I spent 10 minutes hunched over the toilet. The black dress I'd chosen hung on the back of my bedroom door. Simple, elegant, appropriate for a funeral. I put it on mechanically, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Patricia had to help me, her own hands trembling as she fastened the clasp. "Are you sure about what you're planning to do today?" she asked quietly. "Once you say those things publicly, there's no taking them back. The media will be everywhere. It will be the only thing people remember about Michael's funeral." "Good," I said, my voice hard. "Let them remember. Let everyone remember that Michael Foster was murdered by his father and his wife for money. Let that be the story that gets told." At 9 a.m., Detective Morrison arrived at my house with her partner, Detective Rodriguez, and a third person, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Mrs. Foster, this is Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen," Detective Morrison said. "She's prosecuting the case against Richard and Vanessa. She wanted to meet with you before the funeral." We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd confronted Richard 5 days ago, where my entire world had collapsed. Ada Chen pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Mrs. Foster, I want you to know that what you're planning to do today, publicly exposing the details of your son's murder, is extremely unusual. It could potentially impact our case. Defense attorneys will argue that we've poisoned the jury pool, made it impossible for their clients to get a fair trial." "I don't care about their fair trial," I said flatly. "They didn't give Michael a fair chance at life." "I understand your anger. Believe me, I've prosecuted dozens of murder cases, and this one," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "This one is particularly heinous because of the family dynamics. A father killing his son. A wife killing her husband. For money. It's despicable." "So you're asking me not to speak at the funeral?" "No," Ada Chen surprised me. "Actually, I'm here to help you. If you're going to do this, we need to make sure you do it right. You need to stick to facts that are already public record: the arrest, the charges filed, the basic timeline. You cannot mention anything Richard told you in that jail visit yesterday. That conversation is protected, and discussing it publicly could jeopardize the entire case." She pulled out a notepad and pen. "Let's go through exactly what you plan to say, word for word." For the next hour, we crafted my statement. Patricia made suggestions. Detective Morrison added facts. Ada Chen edited out anything that could cause legal problems. By the time we finished, I had 2 pages of typed notes, a speech that would expose Richard and Vanessa's crimes while staying within the bounds of what was legally permissible. "One more thing," Ada Chen said as she prepared to leave. "Vanessa's attorney has filed a motion requesting that you be barred from making any public statements about his client. Judge Miller is reviewing it now. There's a chance, a small one, that you could be legally prohibited from speaking at the funeral." "What?" Patricia exploded. "That's insane. It's her son's funeral. She can say whatever she wants." "Actually, there are limits when criminal proceedings are involved. but I've filed a counter-motion arguing for your First Amendment rights. We should know the judge's decision by noon." After they left, I sat alone in Michael's childhood bedroom, holding his old baseball glove. He'd been so proud when he made the high school team, so devastated when a shoulder injury sophomore year ended his athletic career. I remembered how I'd held him while he cried, promising him that life would bring other opportunities, other chances to shine. I'd been right. He'd found his passion in computer science, excelled at Amazon, built a life he was proud of. And then it had all been stolen by two people who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness and bank accounts. At 11:30, my phone rang. Ada Chen's number. "Judge Miller ruled in your favor. You're free to speak at the funeral. But Mrs. Foster, please stick to the script we prepared. Don't go off book with emotion. Stay factual. Stay controlled." "I will." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. By noon, cars started arriving at Volunteer Park. I'd hired a funeral director, a gentleman named Mr. Carlson, who'd handled everything with compassion and discretion. He'd set up 200 white chairs in neat rows facing a small stage. Michael's casket, the oak one I'd chosen, sat at the center, closed, covered with white roses. I'd insisted on a closed casket. I didn't want people's last memory of Michael to be his broken body. I wanted them to remember him alive, laughing, brilliant, kind. A large screen and projector had been set up beside the stage. The funeral director thought it was for a photo slideshow of Michael's life. But I had other plans. At 1 p.m., guests started arriving. Michael's colleagues from Amazon, dozens of them in dark suits, friends from college, neighbors, people from our church who'd watched Michael grow up. His high school baseball coach, now retired, walked up to me with tears in his eyes. "Mrs. Foster, I'm so sorry. Michael was one of the best kids I ever coached, not just talented kind, always looking out for the younger players." I thanked him, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. Everyone kept saying the same things. "I'm so sorry. He was too young. Such a tragedy. If there's anything I can do." But there was nothing anyone could do. Michael was gone, and the people responsible were in jail, trying to negotiate lighter sentences while my son lay in a casket. At 1:30, a news van pulled up, then another, and another. Somehow word had gotten out that this wasn't just any funeral, that something significant was going to happen. Cameras set up at the back of the seating area. Reporters checked their equipment. This was exactly what I'd wanted. Maximum visibility. Maximum exposure. Patricia gripped my arm. "Diane, there are cameras everywhere. Are you ready for this?" "No. But I'm doing it anyway." At 1:45, Eleanor arrived with Jessica and several other women from my book club. They surrounded me in a protective circle, these women who'd become my army in the past week. Eleanor had organized meal trains, fielded phone calls, protected me from well-meaning but exhausting visitors. Jessica had hired a lawyer to help me freeze Richard's access to any remaining joint accounts. "We're here," Eleanor said simply. "Whatever you need, we've got you." At 1:55, everyone took their seats. The funeral director gave me a 5-minute warning. I stood behind the stage, my typed notes trembling in my hands, and watched the crowd settle. 200 people, 200 witnesses who thought they were coming to mourn a tragic accident. They were about to learn the truth. At exactly 2 p.m., the funeral director stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today to celebrate the life of Michael Robert Foster. Before we begin the formal service, Mrs. Diane Foster, Michael's mother, would like to say a few words." This was it. The moment that would define everything that came after. I walked to the microphone on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I looked out at the sea of faces, some I knew well, others I'd never met, all of them expecting a grieving mother's tribute to her lost son. I unfolded my notes and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice surprisingly steady. Michael would have been overwhelmed by this turnout. He never realized how many lives he touched, how much he meant to so many people. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But before we celebrate Michael's life," I continued, "I need to tell you the truth about his death. Because what you've been told, what the news initially reported, was a lie." The murmuring stopped. Silence fell like a curtain. Every eye locked on me. Michael's death was not an accident. And then I told them everything. "Michael's death was not an accident," I repeated, my voice growing stronger. My son was murdered, deliberately, methodically, by two people he trusted completely. Two people who should have protected him but instead saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. Gasps erupted from the crowd. People shifted in their seats. Camera flashes went off. I could see confusion and shock rippling through the audience like waves. 5 days ago, I received a call from Harborview Medical Center telling me Michael had been killed in a car crash on Interstate 5. The initial report said he had a blood alcohol level of 0.15 and traces of Ambien in his system. It appeared he'd been drinking and driving a terrible, tragic accident. I paused, gripping the podium to steady myself. Patricia stood just off stage, her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. But Michael wasn't a heavy drinker. He was responsible, careful, dedicated to his work at Amazon. Something didn't make sense, so I started looking for answers. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing, 200 people holding their collective breath. What I discovered destroyed me. My husband, Richard Foster, Michael's father, had been having an affair with Michael's wife, Vanessa Chen Foster, for 11 months. 11 months of lies and betrayal while they lived off our family's money and pretended everything was normal. More gasps. A woman in the third row, one of Michael's colleagues, put her hand over her mouth. An older man I recognized as Richard's former business partner stood up abruptly, his face red with shock. But the affair wasn't the worst of it, I continued, my voice cracking but not breaking. Richard and Vanessa had been planning Michael's murder for at least 4 months. They researched how much Ambien would incapacitate him. They calculated insurance payouts, $800,000 from his Amazon policy, $500,000 from a secret policy Richard took out on Michael's life without his knowledge, $900,000 from their house, $200,000 from investment accounts, $2.4 million. That's what my son's life was worth to them. A man in the back row shouted, "This can't be true. Richard would never." "It is true," I cut him off. Richard Foster and Vanessa Chen Foster were arrested 5 days ago and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They are currently being held without bail at King County Jail. This is not speculation. This is not grief-talking. These are facts. I nodded to Mr. Carlson, the funeral director, who'd been standing by the projector. He pressed a button, and the screen lit up with an image, the official King County Jail booking photos of Richard and Vanessa, their names and charges clearly visible. The crowd erupted. People were standing, crying, shouting questions. Cameras zoomed in on the screen. This would be on every news channel by tonight. I raised my hand, asking for quiet. Slowly, people sat back down, though the energy in the park had completely transformed from somber grief to shocked outrage. On the night of October 20th, I continued, reading from my notes, Richard and Vanessa met Michael at a restaurant on Capitol Hill. They crushed 8 Ambien pills into powder and put it in Michael's drink while pretending to reconcile. They kept him at the restaurant for 90 minutes while the medication took effect. Then Vanessa got in the car with Michael, knowing he was severely impaired. My voice broke here, and I had to stop for a moment to compose myself. Eleanor stood up from her seat and came to stand beside me, her hand on my shoulder, lending me strength. "Thank you," I whispered to her before continuing. They drove onto Interstate 5. When Michael was barely conscious, Vanessa convinced him to pull over. She got out of the car and into Richard's vehicle, which had been following them. And then they watched as my son drove away in his impaired state and crashed into a concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. A woman near the front collapsed, sobbing. Michael's baseball coach was openly weeping. Even the reporters looked shaken. Vanessa then inflicted a small cut on her own forehead to appear injured and called 911, claiming she'd been in the crash. But surveillance footage shows her walking away from the scene uninjured. The Seattle Police Department's investigation revealed all of this, the text messages where they planned the murder, the financial records showing Richard had withdrawn $193,000 to fund their affair and pay for their future together. I looked directly at one of the cameras. My husband of 32 years and my daughter-in-law of 9 months are murderers. They killed Michael Robert Foster for money. And I am here today to make sure everyone knows the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, people started standing. First 1, then 5, then 20, then everyone. They weren't applauding, this wasn't that kind of moment. They were standing in solidarity, in shared horror, in support. "Both suspects are facing life in prison without possibility of parole," I said, my voice barely above a whisper now. "But no sentence, no punishment, will ever bring my son back. No justice in this world is adequate for what they took from me. From all of us." I folded my notes and looked out at Michael's casket, draped in white roses. Michael was brilliant. He was kind. He worked hard. He loved hiking and kayaking. He loved Seattle and coffee and terrible sci-fi movies. He called me every Sunday morning just to chat. He was planning to surprise me with a trip to Hawaii for my 80th birthday 3 years from now because he knew I'd always dreamed of seeing the islands. My voice finally broke completely. He deserved to live. He deserved to grow old, to have children, to build a life. And that was stolen from him by people who claimed to love him but really only loved what they could take from him. I pulled out one more document, the last thing I would share publicly. "I want to read you something Michael wrote." I found it in his desk drawer when I was going through his belongings. It's dated October 15th, 5 days before he died. The crowd leaned forward, desperate to hear Michael's own words. "Mom," I read, my voice shaking, "if you're reading this, something bad has happened to me. I've discovered things about Dad and Vanessa that I can't ignore anymore. I hired a private investigator. I have proof they're having an affair. I also have proof Dad has been stealing from your accounts almost $200,000. I'm going to the police next week. I'm filing for divorce. I'm making sure you're protected financially. I know this will destroy you, and I'm so sorry. But I can't let them keep hurting you. I can't let them keep lying. I love you more than anything in this world. You're the best mother anyone could ask for. Whatever happens, please know that everything I am, I owe to you. Your son, Michael." I couldn't continue. I collapsed against the podium, my body racked with sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. Eleanor caught me, held me, while Patricia rushed up from the side. The entire crowd was crying now. Michael's colleagues from Amazon were embracing each other. His high school friends stood with their arms around one another. Even the reporters had tears streaming down their faces. Through my tears, I saw something that made my heart stop. At the very back of the seating area, partially hidden behind a tree, stood a woman I recognized from photos in Richard's phone. She was young, pretty, with dark hair and designer sunglasses. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers and crying. But her crying looked different from everyone else's. It looked theatrical, performed. It was Vanessa's sister, Catherine, and she was recording everything on her phone. Detective Morrison, who'd been standing discreetly to the side, noticed her at the same moment. She moved quickly through the crowd, but Catherine saw her coming and ran. Within seconds, she disappeared into the parking lot, gotten into a silver BMW, and driven away. "She's going to send that recording to Vanessa in jail," Detective Morrison said urgently into her radio. "We need to intercept," but it was too late. The damage was done. Or perhaps I thought with grim satisfaction the justice was served, because now Vanessa would see exactly what her crimes had cost. She would see 200 people who loved Michael learning the truth. She would hear me read her dead husband's letter, written when he knew his life was in danger. She would see that she hadn't gotten away with anything. Pastor Thompson stepped to the microphone, his face ashen. I don't have adequate words for what we've just learned. But I know that Michael Foster was a man of faith, a man who believed in truth and justice. So let us honor him now by celebrating the life he lived, even as we mourn the life that was stolen from him. The service continued, but it was unlike any funeral I'd ever attended. People spoke about Michael through tears of both grief and rage. His Amazon manager talked about his brilliant mind and generous spirit, then added, "And I want everyone here to know Michael's team is pooling resources to hire the best victims advocate to ensure his killers face maximum sentences. No one at Amazon is going to let this injustice stand." Michael's college roommate told funny stories about their years at the University of Washington, then ended with, "Michael deserved better. He deserved everything, and the people who took that from him deserve nothing but our contempt and the full force of the law." One by one, people stood and spoke. And every single tribute ended the same way, with a promise that Michael's murder would not be forgotten, would not be forgiven, would be avenged through whatever legal means available. By the time we lowered Michael's casket into the ground at Evergreen Cemetery 2 hours later, it wasn't just a funeral anymore. It was a declaration of war against the people who'd killed him. As the sun set over Seattle and the last mourners departed, I stood alone by Michael's grave, my hand on the fresh earth that covered my son. "I promised you justice, baby," I whispered, "and I'm going to make sure you get it. I'm going to make sure they never see freedom again. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what they did to you." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of roses and rain. And for the first time since that terrible phone call 5 days ago, I felt something other than just grief and rage. I felt purpose. The funeral made national news within hours. By Sunday morning, my face was on every major network. CNN ran a segment titled, "Mother Exposes Son's Murderers at Funeral." MSNBC interviewed criminal psychologists about family murder conspiracies. Even international outlets picked up the story. The BBC called it one of the most shocking family murder cases in recent American history. My phone rang constantly. Producers from Dateline, NBC, 2020, 48 Hours, all wanting exclusive interviews. Book agents offering six-figure advances for my story. Podcast hosts begging for appearances. I ignored them all and turned off my phone. Patricia fielded the calls that came to the house landline. "My sister is not available for comment. Please respect her privacy during this difficult time. She must have said it 200 times that first day alone." But I couldn't hide from the media storm completely. On Monday morning, Eleanor brought over her laptop and showed me what was happening online. The hashtag number Justice for Michael was trending nationally. Someone had created a petition demanding maximum sentences for Richard and Vanessa. It had 375,000 signatures and counting. "Look at this," Eleanor said, scrolling through Twitter. People were posting photos of Michael from his Amazon profile, from his college days, from hiking trips. Strangers who'd never met him were writing tributes, calling him a victim of greed and betrayal, demanding justice. But there was also darkness. Richard's family had released a statement through their lawyer. "Richard Foster is a good man who made terrible mistakes under extreme emotional duress. We ask for compassion and understanding during this tragic time for all involved." The comments underneath were vicious. "Your good man murdered his own son for money. There's no compassion for child killers. I hope he rots in prison." Vanessa's sister Catherine had posted on Instagram a photo of Vanessa from happier times with the caption, "My sister is not a monster. She's a victim of manipulation by an older, powerful man who controlled every aspect of her life. The truth will come out. Numbers stand with Vanessa." That post had been shared 43,000 times, with comments split between support and outrage. Some people believed Catherine's narrative that Vanessa was a young woman, manipulated by Richard's wealth and authority. Others saw through it immediately. One comment summed up my feelings perfectly. "She's 29 years old, not a child. She married Michael, slept with his father, helped drug him, and watched him die. That's not a victim, that's a killer." On Tuesday, Ada Rebecca Chen called me. "Mrs. Foster, I need to prepare you. Vanessa's attorney, David Brennan, is one of the best defense lawyers in Washington state. He's going to use your funeral speech against us, argue that you've created a media circus that makes a fair trial impossible." "I don't care about their fair trial," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know, but the judge might. We have a hearing on Thursday where Brennan is going to argue for a change of venue, moving the trial out of Seattle to somewhere the case hasn't received as much attention. He might also argue for separate trials, trying to distance Vanessa from Richard's actions. Can he do that? He can try. Judge Miller will decide. But Diane, you need to understand your public statement. At the funeral was powerful, but it's also given the defense ammunition. They're going to paint you as a grieving mother who's so consumed by rage that you're not thinking clearly, that you're influencing public opinion before the facts have been fully established in court. The facts have been established. They murdered my son. I believe you. The evidence supports you. But in a courtroom, defense attorneys create doubt. They create alternative narratives. Brennan is already floating the story that Richard was having a mental health crisis after retirement, that Vanessa was afraid of him, that the Ambien in Michael's system might have been accidentally ingested. I felt my blood pressure spike. That's insane. The text messages alone prove, I know. But juries can be swayed by emotion, by sympathy for a young woman who cries on the stand and claims she was coerced. We have to be smarter than they are. We have to be more prepared. On Wednesday morning, Detective Morrison came to my house with new information. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been working around the clock. "We've been analyzing Michael's personal computer files," she said, opening her laptop at my kitchen table. "He kept meticulous records of everything he discovered about Richard and Vanessa. Photos of them together at hotels. Credit card statements showing purchases Richard made for Vanessa. And this," she pulled up a video file. "Michael set up a hidden camera in his house 2 weeks before he died." She pressed play. The video showed the living room of Michael's Ballard home. The timestamp read October 8th, 3:15 in the afternoon. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door opened, and Vanessa walked in, followed immediately by Richard. They were all over each other instantly, kissing with an intensity that made me look away. I heard them stumbling toward the couch, heard Vanessa's breathy voice saying, "Michael's at work until 9. We have hours." Richard's response made my stomach turn. "I can't wait to be done hiding. Once we're in Vancouver with the insurance money, we can live however we want. No more sneaking around." "What about Diane?" Vanessa asked. "What about her? She'll have nothing. Michael's policies name me as secondary beneficiary if you're unable to claim them. The house will go to probate, which I can contest. She'll be alone in that house with her grief and her ignorance." They both laughed. Actually laughed at the idea of me grieving and alone. I had to run to the bathroom and vomit. The hatred coursing through me so intense it was physically painful. When I came back, Detective Morrison had paused the video. "There are 7 more recordings like this," she said quietly. All of them showing Richard and Vanessa discussing the murder plan, the money, their future together. Michael documented everything. He knew he was in danger, and he was building a case. "Why didn't he just go to the police immediately?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did he wait?" According to his personal journal, which we also recovered, he wanted to gather enough evidence to ensure convictions. He was worried that if he moved too quickly, they'd find a way to destroy evidence or claim it was all a misunderstanding. He was being thorough. Careful. Detective Morrison closed her laptop. He just ran out of time. On Thursday, I attended the hearing at King County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row with Patricia on one side and Ada Chen on the other, while Richard and Vanessa were brought in separately, both wearing orange jumpsuits, both shackled. I hadn't seen Richard since our jail visit. He looked worse now, thinner, his hair completely gray, his face haggard. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, he flinched and looked away. Good. I hoped my face haunted him every second of every day for the rest of his miserable life. Vanessa looked different, too. She'd clearly been crying, her eyes were puffy and red. But as I watched her, I noticed something calculated about her grief. She glanced at the reporters, making sure they could see her distress. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue at precisely timed intervals. It was a performance. Judge Miller, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the court to order. "We're here today to address several motions filed by the defense. Mr. Brennan, you may proceed." David Brennan stood, a tall man, in an expensive suit with perfect silver hair and a voice like butter. "Your Honor, my client Vanessa Chen has been subjected to a campaign of character assassination orchestrated by the victim's mother, who used her son's funeral as a platform to poison public opinion against my client before any trial has occurred." Mrs. Foster exercised her First Amendment rights. Ada Chen countered immediately. "She has every right to speak publicly about a case that has devastated her family. She turned a funeral into a media spectacle." Brennan's voice rose. "My client cannot possibly receive a fair trial in Seattle now. Every potential juror has seen the news coverage, read the social media posts, formed opinions based on emotion rather than evidence. We're requesting a change of venue and separate trials for Mr. Manation's Parsa Zettard, with Cosmopolitans, read Axe.com. Foster and Mrs. Chen." Judge Miller looked at me directly. "Mrs. Foster, would you like to address the court?" Ada Chen started to object, but I stood up before she could stop me. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "You may, but keep it brief." I walked to the podium, my legs shaking but my voice steady. "Your Honor, I didn't create a media spectacle. I told the truth at my son's funeral about the people who murdered him." If that truth makes it difficult for them to manipulate a jury, then good. Michael deserves a trial where facts matter more than performances, where evidence matters more than tears. I looked directly at Vanessa. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read: fear, hatred, regret. My son documented everything these two people did. He left video evidence, written evidence, financial evidence. He built a case against his killers before they killed him. I'm not poisoning anything. I'm making sure his voice is heard. Thank you, Mrs. Foster, Judge Miller said. You may sit down. She spent several minutes reviewing documents, the courtroom silent, except for the scratch of her pen. Finally, she looked up. Motion for change of venue is denied. This is a Seattle case involving Seattle residents. It will be tried in Seattle. However, she looked at both defense attorneys. I am granting separate trials. Mr. Foster and Mrs. Chen will be tried independently, beginning with Mr. Foster in January. Brennan smiled slightly. This was what he wanted: a chance to distance Vanessa from Richard's actions, to build sympathy for her as a young woman caught up with an older man. But Ada Chen didn't look worried. She leaned over and whispered to me, "That's fine. We'll convict Richard first, then use his testimony against Vanessa. She won't be able to hide behind him." As the hearing concluded and Richard and Vanessa were led away, Vanessa turned and looked at me one more time. Our eyes locked across the courtroom. And in that moment, I saw pure, undiluted hatred in her expression. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but I read her lips clearly enough. This isn't over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. "Mrs. Foster, how do you feel about the judge's ruling? Do you think justice will be served? What do you want to say to Richard and Vanessa?" I stopped on the courthouse steps and faced the cameras. Patricia tried to pull me away, but I shook my head. I had one more thing to say publicly. "To Richard and Vanessa," I said, looking directly into the nearest camera lens, "you took my son from me. You destroyed my family. You betrayed every trust, every bond, every sacred relationship. But you didn't win. Because Michael's voice is still here. His evidence is still here. And I am still here. And I will be at every hearing, every trial date, every parole hearing for the rest of my life. You will never escape what you did. Never." That night, my statement went viral. Number Justice for Michael trended worldwide. And in my empty house, surrounded by photos of my dead son, I finally let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, justice was possible. 2 weeks after the funeral, on a cold November morning, I received a package at my doorstep. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting. I recognized immediately Richard's distinctive scrawl that I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 32 years. My hands trembled as I brought it inside. Patricia was visiting her daughter in Portland for a few days, so I was alone. Part of me wanted to throw the package in the trash unopened. But another part, the part that needed to understand how a father could murder his son, compelled me to open it. Inside was a letter. 23 pages, handwritten, front and back. I sat at my kitchen table and began to read, my coffee growing cold beside me. "Dear Diane, I know you hate me. I know you'll never forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to tell you the complete truth before my trial begins, before lawyers twist everything into strategies and narratives. This is what really happened, in my own words, with no one filtering it. You deserve that much at least. I met Vanessa at Michael's office Christmas party 2 Decembers ago. She was new to Seattle, new to Amazon's marketing department, and Michael was so proud to introduce her as his girlfriend. I remember shaking her hand and thinking she was pretty, but nothing extraordinary. Just another young woman my son was dating. But then she looked at me, really looked at me, and she said, "Michael talks about you constantly. He says you're the smartest man he knows." It was such a simple compliment, but Diane, I can't explain what it did to me. After 2 years of retirement, I felt invisible, useless. You and I barely talked anymore. We'd become roommates more than spouses. I spent my days pretending to care about model trains while feeling my life slip away into meaningless routine. Vanessa made me feel seen again, alive again, important again. I had to stop reading. The paper crumpled in my fist as rage coursed through me. He was trying to justify it, trying to make me understand. But there was no understanding this betrayal. I forced myself to continue. The affair started 4 months after they got married. Vanessa called me one afternoon crying, saying she and Michael had fought, that she had no one else to talk to. Could I meet her for coffee? I should have said no. God, Diane, I should have said no. But I went. At that coffee shop in Capitol Hill, she told me she felt trapped, that Michael was obsessed with his career, never home, never really present. She said she'd made a mistake marrying him but didn't know how to get out without destroying everyone. And then she put her hand on mine and said, "You understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own life, don't you?" I did understand. That was the problem. I understood exactly what she meant because that's how I'd felt for years with you, Diane. We'd stopped being partners and become just two people coexisting in the same house, going through motions, waiting to die. So I kissed her. Right there in that coffee shop, I kissed my son's wife, and she kissed me back. And everything that came after, all the lies, all the betrayal, all the horror, started with that one terrible choice. My vision blurred with tears. He blamed me. He blamed our marriage. He blamed feeling invisible. But millions of people felt invisible and didn't murder their children. For months, it was just an affair. Wrong, yes. Cruel, yes. But not murderous. We met at hotels when you thought I was at train club meetings. We texted constantly. We talked about running away together, but it was just fantasy. Or so I thought. Everything changed in August when Vanessa told me she was pregnant. With my child. She'd been tracking her ovulation, trying to get pregnant deliberately without telling me. She wanted to trap me, to force my hand, and it worked. Michael was already suspicious by then. He'd noticed her morning sickness, her mood changes. He'd found some of our text messages Vanessa had been careless with her phone. He confronted her, and she lied, said they were to an old boyfriend she'd cut off. But Michael didn't believe her. He hired a private investigator. When Vanessa told me Michael knew, when she told me he was building evidence against both of us, when she told me he planned to divorce her and expose me to you, and possibly press criminal charges for the money I'd taken from our accounts, I panicked, Diane. I panicked like I've never panicked in my life. Vanessa said there was only one way out. Only one solution that protected us both, that gave us a future together. I said no at first. I said absolutely not. But she kept pushing. She said Michael was going to destroy us anyway, that he'd already told friends we were having an affair, that it was only a matter of time before the whole world knew. She said if we didn't act, we'd both end up in prison for the financial fraud while Michael walked away with everything. And I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to believe her because the alternative was facing what I'd done, facing you, facing the consequences of my choices. I threw the letter across the kitchen. It hit the wall and pages scattered everywhere. I screamed a sound of pure anguish that echoed through my empty house. This was worse than I'd imagined. They hadn't just killed Michael in a moment of panic. They'd discussed it, debated it, planned it over weeks while I cooked dinner and watered plants and lived my oblivious life. After several minutes, I picked up the scattered pages and continued reading. I had to know everything. The night we killed Michael, and yes, Diane, we killed him, there's no softening that truth was supposed to go differently. The plan was to make him drowsy enough that if he tried to tell anyone about us the next day, he'd seem impaired, possibly mentally unstable. We were going to suggest he needed psychiatric help. We were going to discredit him, not kill him. But when we met him at the restaurant that night, Michael wasn't the confused, heartbroken husband we expected. He was calm, cold. He'd already filed divorce papers. He'd already reported the financial fraud to your bank. He'd already scheduled a meeting with you for the next morning to tell you everything. He looked at me across that table and said, "Dad, I feel sorry for you. You're 66 years old having a midlife crisis with a woman who only wants your money. When Mom finds out, and she will, because I'm telling her tomorrow she's going to leave you with nothing, and you'll deserve it." Vanessa excused herself to the bathroom. She texted me, "Change of plans. All of it. Tonight." I knew what she meant. And Diane, I could have said no. I could have stood up and walked out. I could have confessed everything to Michael right then, begged his forgiveness, tried to salvage something. But I didn't. I crushed those pills and I put them in his drink and I watched him consume his own death. The worst part, the part that will haunt me until I die, is that Michael knew. About halfway through dinner, his eyes started getting glassy and he looked at me and said, "What did you do?" He knew I'd drugged him. And the look on his face, Diane. The betrayal. The disbelief. My own son realizing his father was trying to hurt him. He tried to stand up, tried to leave, but the Ambien was taking effect. Vanessa convinced him to let her drive him home. She got him to the car. I followed in mine, and you know the rest. The sound of the impact plays in my head constantly. I hear it when I'm trying to sleep. I hear it when I'm awake. I hear our son dying over and over and over. I deserve whatever punishment the law gives me. I deserve your hatred. I deserve to rot in prison for the rest of my life, but I need you to know one thing, Diane. I did love Michael. I loved him more than I've ever loved anyone, except maybe you, back when we were young and happy, and that makes what I did even more unforgivable. I destroyed the person I loved most for a woman I didn't even really love, for money I didn't need, for a fantasy life that was never real. I'm a monster. I accept that. I just wanted you to hear it from me first, before the lawyers turn this into a performance. I'm sorry. For everything. For all of it. For wasting 32 years of your life with someone who turned out to be capable of the unthinkable. Richard. I sat with the letter for hours, reading it multiple times, searching for something remorse, true regret, an explanation that made sense. But there was nothing there except excuses and self-pity. Richard had made choices at every turn, and every choice led to our son's murder. At 3 p.m, I called Detective Morrison. I received a letter from Richard. 23 pages. Should I have opened it? Legally, yes, you can read mail sent to you. Do you still have it? Yes. Don't throw it away. It might be useful for the prosecution. What does it say? I summarized the contents, my voice mechanical, detached. When I finished, Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Foster, I need to tell you something. We received a letter too. From Vanessa. 17 pages. Her story is completely different. If this part really struck a chord with you, tap that like button to let me know you're with me. Do you see yourself in the character's journey? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear your take. Different how? She claims Richard threatened to kill you if she didn't help him murder Michael. She claims she was terrified of him, that he was violent and controlling, that everything was his idea. She's painting herself as a domestic violence victim who had no choice but to participate. I laughed a bitter, broken sound. Of course she is. Let me guess she's going to cry on the witness stand and talk about how scared she was? That's exactly what her defense strategy will be. And Diane, it might work. Juries are sympathetic to young women who claim abuse. We need to be prepared for the possibility that she gets a lighter sentence than Richard. That's not justice. I know, but it's the legal system. We work with what we have. That night, I wrote my own letter. Not to Richard or Vanessa, they didn't deserve my words, but to Michael. A letter I would never send but needed to write anyway. Dear Michael, my beautiful boy, my miracle, my everything. I failed you. I was so focused on being a good wife to Richard that I didn't see what he really was. I was so happy you'd found someone to love that I didn't look closely enough at Vanessa. You tried to protect me. You were gathering evidence, building a case, preparing to expose them, and they killed you for it. They killed you because you loved me enough to save me from their betrayal. I'm so sorry I wasn't smarter. I'm so sorry I didn't see the danger. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you the way you tried to protect me. But I promise you this, baby, I will fight for you every single day for the rest of my life. I will make sure your killers never know freedom. I will tell your story to anyone who will listen. Your death will not be meaningless. I love you. I will always love you. And I will see you again someday, when this nightmare is finally over. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in Michael's baby book, tucked between his first footprint and a lock of his hair from his first haircut. Evidence of a life that began with so much promise and ended in such horrific betrayal. The trial was 2 months away. 2 months to prepare myself for seeing Richard and Vanessa again. 2 months to steel myself for their lies and manipulations. 2 months to hold on to my rage, because rage was all I had left keeping me alive. December brought snow to Seattle, unusual and beautiful, covering the city in white that felt obscene given the darkness consuming my life. I spent most days in Michael's childhood bedroom, surrounded by his baseball trophies and college textbooks, trying to feel close to him in the only way I still could. On December 10th, Exactly 7 weeks after Michael's death, Detective Morrison called with news that would shatter what little remained of my ability to trust anything or anyone. "Mrs. Foster, we need you to come to the station. There's been a development in the financial investigation." An hour later, I sat across from Detective Morrison and Detective Rodriguez in that same conference room where they'd first shown me evidence of the affair. This time, they looked even more uncomfortable. "Diane," Detective Morrison began, using my first name now that we'd spent so many hours together dissecting my life's worst nightmare. "We've been tracing every financial transaction Richard and Vanessa made. We found something that complicates things." "What could possibly complicate murder?" I asked bitterly. Detective Rodriguez opened a folder. 3 months ago, Richard transferred $78,000 into an account belonging to someone named Marcus Webb. "Do you know that name?" "No." "Who is he?" "He's a former Army medic turned private nurse. He specializes in elder care and pain management. And he has a criminal record. He was investigated 6 years ago for suspicious deaths at a nursing home in Spokane, but charges were never filed due to insufficient evidence." My blood ran cold. Why would Richard be paying him? "We questioned Mr. Webb yesterday. He initially claimed the money was for legitimate medical consulting. But when we showed him evidence that he could be charged as an accessory to murder, he started talking." Detective Morrison pulled out a recorded statement. "Mrs. Foster, this is going to be difficult to hear." She pressed play. A male voice, rough and defensive. "Look, Foster contacted me in August. Said his mother-in-law was elderly, suffering, wanted to end things peacefully but didn't want to burden her family with that choice. He asked if I knew how to make it look natural. I told him about medication combinations that could cause cardiac arrest untraceable if done right. He paid me $78,000 for the information and for agreeing to keep quiet." I couldn't breathe. "Mother-in-law. He was talking about me." "Yes," Detective Morrison said softly. "Richard and Vanessa weren't just planning to kill Michael, they were planning to kill you too." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my vision tunneling. When? When were they going to do it? According to Marcus Webb, Richard said, after the first death settles and the insurance money comes through, they were going to wait 3 to 6 months after Michael's death, let you grieve, let things calm down, then make your death look like a heart attack from the stress of losing your son. I vomited into the trash can beside the table, my body rejecting this information as violently as it had rejected everything else about this nightmare. Patricia, who'd driven me to the station, rubbed my back while I heaved up nothing but bile and horror. "There's more," Detective Rodriguez said grimly. "We found text messages between Richard and Vanessa from September discussing your life insurance policy, the one you and Richard took out 15 years ago." He showed me printouts. Vanessa to Richard, "How much is Dee's policy worth?" Richard, $350,000, plus the house will be mine as surviving spouse. Probably worth $700,000 now with Seattle real estate. Over $1 million total. Vanessa, that plus Michael's money puts us at almost $4 million. We could live anywhere, do anything. Richard, we need to be patient. M first, then her. Both have to look completely natural, or we get nothing. Vanessa, I know. I can wait. As long as I know we're working toward our future. I stared at the messages, unable to process that Richard, the man who'd held my hand through labor, who'd promised to love me forever, who'd grown old beside me, had calculated my death down to the dollar amount it would bring him. $4 million, I whispered. That's what our lives were worth combined. Michael and me. $4 million. I'm so sorry, Detective Morrison said, but this actually helps our case. It establishes a broader pattern of premeditated murder for financial gain. It shows this wasn't just about Michael, it was about systematic elimination of family members for money. Have you arrested Marcus Webb? Yes. He's being charged as an accessory and conspiracy to commit murder. He's also agreed to testify against Richard and Vanessa in exchange for a reduced sentence. Patricia spoke up for the first time, her voice shaking with rage. So Richard was going to kill his son, then kill his wife. Make my sister's death look like she died of grief. That's beyond evil. That's demonic. I thought about the past 7 weeks, the nights I couldn't sleep, the weight I'd lost. I was down to 109 pounds now, my clothes hanging off my frame. The chest pains I'd been having that my doctor said were panic attacks but felt like actual heart attacks. Richard had been counting on that. He'd been waiting for my grief to weaken me, make me vulnerable. Then he would have struck, made it look like my broken heart finally gave out. "I need to see him," I said suddenly. "Diane, I don't think Patricia started. I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and ask him how he was planning to kill me." Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with her partner. "That's highly irregular and potentially dangerous for your emotional well-being." "I don't care about my emotional well-being. It's already destroyed. I need answers." 2 hours later, I was back in that visiting room at King County Jail, sitting across from Richard through plexiglass. He looked worse than before. Gaunt, pale, his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he actually flinched. I picked up the phone. He slowly did the same. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Did you really think you'd get away with killing both of us?" Richard's face crumpled. "Diane, Don't say my name. Don't you dare say my name. Answer the question. Were you planning to kill me after you killed Michael?" His silence was answer enough. "Say it," I demanded. "Say it out loud. Tell me you hired someone to help you figure out how to murder your wife."